What's the strangest, most bizarre trial in the history of the Wild West? Was it the time a saloon cat was put on trial for stealing fish? Or maybe the case where a judge ordered a horse to testify? While those stories are legendary, they missed the point. The West wasn't just wild, it was a stage. And justice wasn't always about what was right, it was about putting on the best show for the crowd. And no trial illustrates this better than the strange, almost unbelievable case of Jeremiah Jeb Crow.
This isn't a story you'll find in history books. This is a story whispered in dusty old saloons, a cautionary tale about what happens when the thirst for spectacle eclipses the pursuit of truth. Our story begins in the year 1888, in a godforsaken little town called Gold Creek, Colorado. It was a place where fortune seekers flocked, where the only law was the law of the gun, and where a man could lose his life over a poker game, a spilled drink, or a hidden secret. Our main character is Jeremiah Crow, or as everyone called him, Jeb. He wasn't a young gun anymore. The years had etched themselves onto his face, like canyons carved into a mountain. Jeb was a former bounty hunter, a man who had seen more violence than most could ever imagine. But he put that life behind him. Now he lived a quiet, solitary life on the outskirts of Gold Creek, raising horses and living off the land. He was a man of few words and even fewer friends, but he was respected for his past, and his reputation for being as sharp as a snake's tooth. Then there's Judge Elias Thorne, a man who saw the Wild West not as a land of opportunity, but as a backdrop for his own legend. Thorne was a peacock in a dusty town. He believed justice wasn't just a duty, it was a performance. His courtroom was his stage, and the townsfolk were his captive audience. He would twist every case into a dramatic spectacle, all to ensure his name would be remembered as the greatest judge the West had ever known. The victim in our story is Silas Finch, a slick, newly arrived saloon owner who was found dead in his own establishment one hot afternoon. A single gunshot to the chest. The murder weapon was found at the scene, a revolver that belonged to none other than Jeb Crow. Witnesses claimed they saw Jeb storming out of Finch's saloon just minutes before the shot was fired. The case was open and shut, at least that's what everyone thought. Judge Thorne had his perfect show, and Jeb Crow, the quiet old man, was about to become the star. But they all underestimated Jeb. Because while the judge was preparing his stage, Jeb was already reading a different kind of script. The trial of Jeremiah Crow was nothing short of a spectacle. Judge Elias Thorne, in his finest robe, presided over the courtroom like a maestro conducting an orchestra. Every gesture, every word, was for the benefit of the packed audience. The prosecution, a loud and overly confident lawyer from Denver, painted a clear picture. A lone gunman motivated by an old grudge taking down a rival. The gun was found, the witnesses had spoken, and the case to everyone was a done deal. But something was off. The witnesses were unreliable, most of them drunkards from Finch's saloon who changed their stories with every shot of whiskey. This star witness was a traveling salesman who claimed he had a vision of Jeb committing the crime. Judge Thorne, instead of dismissing the nonsense, played along, relishing the dramatic flair. He even allowed the prosecution to present an expert witness, a self-proclaimed phrenologist who claimed Jeb's skull shape indicated a propensity for violence. The crowd loved it, cheering and jeering as if they were at a stage play. Throughout it all, Jeb Crow sat in silence, his eyes darting around the room, not with fear but with an unnerving calm. He wasn't watching the judge or the jury or the lawyers. He was watching the people. He was looking at their faces, their reactions, and their subtle movements. He wasn't looking for an alibi, he was looking for a crack in the story. The defense attorney, a timid local who had clearly been bought off, made a half-hearted attempt to question the witnesses, but it was all for show. The trial was hurtling towards its inevitable conclusion. Judge Thorne was already preparing his dramatic closing statement, a speech that would surely cement his place in the annals of Gold Creek history. Just as the judge was about to call for a recess, a small figure shuffled into the courtroom. It was Billy, a young boy who worked as a busboy at Finch's saloon. He was clutching a ragged tin cup, his eyes wide with fear. The judge, annoyed by the interruption, ordered him out. But Billy, with a shaky voice, spoke up. "Silas," he was bragging. The courtroom fell silent. This wasn't part of the script. "He was bragging about a big score," Billy continued, his voice gaining a little more confidence. "He said it was his life's work, and he kept calling it the old man's curse. He said he was gonna be rich. Said he had a special leather pouch for it, all shiny and new." The judge, with a dismissive wave, declared the testimony irrelevant. "This is a murder trial, boy, not a case about petty theft." But Jeb Crow for the first time spoke. His voice, low and gravelly, cut through the noise. "He's right, Judge. It's not about the money. It's about the pouch." "Tell me, Billy," Jeb said, his eyes fixed on the boy. "Did you see what kind of pouch it was?" Billy nodded, tears welling in his eyes. "It had a piece of my ma's quilt on it. She gave it to me to fix a hole in my boot, but I gave it to him instead to fix a cut he had on his hand. He put it on the side of the pouch." A hush fell over the room. The prosecution laughed, a little too loudly. "Your Honor, this is an old man's desperate tale. A piece of cloth? This is absurd." But Jeb just stood up, his shoulders straight. He pulled a small, bloody piece of leather from his pocket. It had been meticulously wrapped in a handkerchief. "This here," he said, holding it up for everyone to see, "was in the shoe of the deceased. It has the same pattern as a money pouch and a small piece of blue quilt sewn into it. The same one Billy saw. And the blood, it's not from a fight. It's a clean cut like a paper cut just on the inside." The judge slammed his gavel. "This is inadmissible. This is an old man's last resort." But Jeb wasn't done. He turned to the judge, a sly smirk on his lips. "I have a proposition, Your Honor. The truth ain't in the words of drunks or the shape of my head. The truth is in the science. Let's reenact the crime." The crowd buzzed with excitement. Judge Thorne, seeing an opportunity for even greater showmanship, agreed. This was his chance to prove his genius. "I'll play the victim," Thorne declared, puffing out his chest. "And you, Mr. Crow, will demonstrate your little theory." The courtroom was rearranged. A replica of Finch's saloon was set up, complete with a bar and a chair where Finch's body had been found. Jeb, holding a revolver that the court had carefully inspected and unloaded, stood across the room. The crowd held its breath. Jeb raised the gun, but he didn't aim at the judge. He aimed at a small scuff mark on the wall behind the bar. He pulled the trigger. A loud bang echoed through the room and a bullet shot out, hitting the wall. But the bullet didn't just leave a hole. It struck a loose piece of plaster, and as the plaster fell, something else dropped to the floor with a metallic clink. It was a gold coin. A single shiny gold coin, covered in old, dried blood, with a tiny scrap of cloth still stuck to it. Jeb walked over, picked it up, and held it out. "Your Honor," he said, his voice quiet but firm, "the killer wanted to make it look like a botched robbery. They shot Finch, took his money, and tossed a few coins on the floor to make it seem like a struggle. But they made a mistake. They didn't see that one of the coins had a tiny piece of blood-soaked cloth on it, a piece that came from the money pouch they'd just stolen. They hid it in a tiny hole in the wall, thinking no one would ever find it. But you see, Your Honor, a good bounty hunter knows to look for the things no one else can see. And that ain't a botched robbery. That's a perfect frame-up." The crowd was silent. The stage was empty, the drama was gone. All that was left was the cold, hard truth, laid bare for all to see. Jeb had just put on the best show of the night, and he hadn't said a single lie. He had exposed the truth, and now, everyone was ready to see who was really in the spotlight. The silent courtroom stared at the gold coin, then at Jeb Crow, and finally at Judge Elias Thorne. The judge's face, once a mask of theatrical grandeur, was now pale, a cold dread setting in. Jeb's eyes, calm and unwavering, locked onto a man standing behind the judge's podium. His young aide, a man named Bartholomew. Jeb's voice, a steady, unhurried whisper, cut through the silence. "That coin, it's a marker. A marker for a deal gone bad," Jeb stated. Silas Finch wasn't a victim of a random robbery. He was a thief who stole from his own partner. And his partner? was the man who arranged this whole circus. Jeb turned his gaze to Bartholomew. You and Finch stole a shipment of gold from the old mine. The old man's curse wasn't about me, it was about the original owner of that gold. You killed Finch to keep all the treasure for yourself, and you framed me, a man with a reputation for being quick with a gun, so no one would look for a different killer. You hid the rest of the gold in Thorne's office, knowing the law would never look there. You thought you'd be a hero helping your boss catch the notorious bounty hunter. But you underestimated a man who sees through the smoke and mirrors. The crowd erupted. The carefully constructed spectacle of Judge Thorne's courtroom shattered in an instant. The justice they craved wasn't in the judge's dramatic pronouncements, but in the quiet, undeniable truth brought forth by a man they had already condemned. Thorne, seeing his carefully crafted legacy crumble, tried to regain control, but it was too late. The jury, a group of tired, ordinary people, had seen enough. They needed no more theatrics. The verdict was quick and unanimous: not guilty. Bartholomew, the young aide, was arrested on the spot. Judge Thorne, stripped of his authority and his audience, was left alone in the silent courtroom, his grand stage now nothing more than a dusty room. Jeb Crow, the man who had been a hair's breadth from the gallows, simply walked out. He didn't stop to bask in the cheers or accept the apologies. He just mounted his horse and rode back to his quiet life. A young reporter, chasing after him, asked why he hadn't spoken up sooner. Jeb, without looking back, gave his final, timeless piece of wisdom. Truth ain't always the loudest thing in the room, son. Sometimes it's just the quietest. You gotta listen for it. And that's the strangest truth about the Wild West. It wasn't about the gunfights and the grand speeches. It was about the men and women who lived in the silence between the chaos and the quiet, almost invisible threads that held their world together. If you're fascinated by the untold stories of the West, if you want to dig deeper than the legends, subscribe and ring the bell to join us on our next journey into the heart of the American frontier.